Good morning. This is Kim Borna, and this is a mini CCYA training on my progress path at CCYA. This is a very casual video, and it's just information that I want to make sure is shared with everyone about the My Progress report path that we use at the Center for Children and Young Adults. The first thing that I want you to know is this was created to assist us with the individual service plan. The individual service plan can be an over-cumbersome and very burdensome document for youth because it contains a lot of information and a lot of goals, and so the youth don't always, they're not always able to connect with it. So what we wanted to create was something much more simple that could break down the individual service plan as well as help us with the Casey life skills and help us to be able to get the youth more involved in monitoring and identifying their progress. So the My Progress Path has these 13 areas in which we are looking at progress for the youth. They start with self-care, home life, daily living, social relationships, education, communication, housing and money management, career planning, work planning, health and wellness, leadership, collaborative problem solving, and conduct. So one of the issues that's coming up in dealing with the My Progress paths is how we actually score them, and that actually has a lot to do with how we're going to use them. So it's very important that what we're trying to identify and the goal of the Progress Path is to identify areas in which youth are achieving and areas in which youth are not achieving. So what happens when we look at the progress plan is that we know that some kids actually are doing well in some areas and not well in others, but we're not always able, as staff coming in on shifts in and out, able to see that progress and know exactly when we come on a shift what areas a kid is succeeding in and what areas they need improvement in. It also helps us to see that maybe our kids are achieving in more areas than we thought, and we can hone in on those areas where they're not. So the Progress Path is set up really on a school calendar schedule. So it starts in August and goes throughout the year. But we may have a kid who comes in the month of February, and so that's when their progress plan will start. The next part of it is being able to sit down and get that baseline of where they're at when we first are doing the progress plan. And so we really have to have someone who knows a lot about that youth. So we may get more information as we go along working with that youth. Program directors are asked to score these using the scale on the back. So let's take a look at each area and talk about the scoring. So self-care. Under self-care, we're looking at hygiene, nutrition, exercise, and sleep habits. So we may have a kid who, takes a shower, keeps themselves clean, eats their meals here at the center in a way. The question is, what exercise? Are they involved in any sports, any activities? Are they engaged in any activities on campus? And then their sleep habits. Are they kids who are up wandering around at 1 o'clock in the morning, or kids who are not going to sleep until 3 o'clock in the morning? What are their sleep habits? So for someone who is maybe not engaged in sports or doing any exercise, and someone who's having some sleep issues, we may want to give a 3 for hygiene. Their nutrition is a 2, that's 5. Exercise, they're not doing any, so that's a 0. And then looking at their sleep habits, we may see that they have not severe sleep problems, but they are having some issues and give them a 2. So a 2 plus 3 plus 2 is 8. So they get an 8 out of on the self-care. So let's write that down so we know exactly what we're going to be moving forward with. So we give them an 8 on self-care. So let's go back to the next one. Home life. Okay. If we've got a kid who really does not keep their room clean at all, they're going to get a 0. If we have a kid who is doing their own laundry, but sometimes failing to do it, we might give them a 1. If they're completing assignments and chores timely, if they're not cleaning their room, the chances of them being cleaning their assignments and chores timely might not be very good, so they might get a 0 or a 1. So I'll put down a 1 because they've done some chores, but they don't do them routinely. Good use of leisure time. If we've got someone who's always walking around the dorm, causing trouble with other kids, or complaining about stuff, or not engaging in an activity, if they're in LifeWorks and they're not, doing any activities in the community, we might give them a 0. And then if we have participation in house meetings, if they're disruptive in house meetings and not participating, or man, this stinks, I don't want to be here, or all complaints, and not trying to do any problem solving with everyone, we might give them a 0 as well. So here they've only gotten 2 points under home life. So we go to home life and we record a 2. Okay, so let's look at the next one, which is daily living. Under daily living, we have whether they're doing any extracurricular activities at all. Something that either a club, if they're in choir, that counts for the center, or if they're on step team, they're doing any kind of extracurricular activity at the center or at school, or even going to church on Sunday in the communities. So let's say we've got somebody in choir who is also going to church, but they're not doing anything at school, we might give them a 2. For church and spiritual, if they're going to church, they get a 2. For community, connections, mentors, do they have any mentors? Do they have any people in the community? Who are they? Maybe they're really, really connected to a staff member, or maybe they're really, really connected to a family friend that they visit. They could get a 2. And then the last one is, are they making positive choices? And this is a tough one for our kids because a lot of our kids are not making positive choices. So in this case, we're going to say going to church is a positive choice. We're going to say being in choir is a positive choice. And working with someone in the community is a positive choice. But maybe these kids are engaged in, so that might be a 3, but maybe they're making poor choices and they're smoking marijuana, or they're missing curfew. So it might bring their positive choices back down to a 1. So that's a total of 2, 4, 6, 7. So for home life, they get a 7. For daily living, daily living, they get a 7. For social relationships, we're looking at their positive and appropriate relationship with peers. So particularly if our kids have a history of negative relationships with peers, or if they're sexually acting out, or if they're being aggressive, or if they don't have any friendships or positive relationships, we're going to be looking at that. So let's say that we've got a kid who gets along with kids sometimes, but also fights sometimes. We might split the difference on that one and give them a 1. What are the relationship with staff and teachers? If the staff feel like they're cursing at them or disrespecting them, or the teachers have suspended them from school, or have sent a note home, or there's a negative issue there, we might give them a 0 or a 1. So I would say if they're having negative relationships with the staff and teachers, we'd give them a 0. What is their relationship with their siblings and family? If they're having visits with family members or a sibling, but they're walking out of the visits, they're not staying in the visits, they're arguing with them, we might want to give them a 0 or a 1. So I'm going to give them, but if they're having positive conversations on the telephone, but visits are difficult, I would definitely give them a 1 and not a 0. With mentors and connections, other people in the community that they are connected to, not volunteers, because that's the last area. How are they interacting with other people in the community? If they're going to church, how are they interacting with the people at church? If they've got that family friend that comes and visits them, how are those visits going? If they're going well, we'd give them a 2. With volunteers, how do they do when we bring volunteers on campus? How do they do when they go to a volunteer activity? Depending on how those interactions, or do they even want to do that? If we have a sugar shack and they don't participate in February and they don't want to be with the volunteers, maybe we give them a 0. So that's a 1, 2, 3, 4 for social relationships. We're looking for our baseline of where they're at now, so I'm giving them a 4. Under education, If we look at attendance in school, we're going to have to give them a 1, a 0, a 1, or a 2. So if they're not attending or refusing to go to school, it's a 0. If they are attending or if they're suspended, it's a 0. If they're suspended at the time that you do this report. If their attendance is that they're going to school and sometimes and not all the time it's a 1, and if there's no problem with attendance, it's a 2. So let's say we've got a kid who is going to school, who sometimes in the morning says, I'm not going, and sometimes goes, you give them a 1. If we look at their tardiness and truancy, that they're going to school, but they're not getting up on time and someone's having to take them to school, late.